Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay. There we go. All right. Okay, so you guys are going to have to stay with me today rather than just record myself kind of talking about all this. I'm going to do it live with you guys so you can ask questions if you have them. But we're going to be doing guided notes. If we were in class, it'd be a little bit easier. But what I need you to get set up is you're going to want to do your split screen right now. And for you guys, the easiest way, and you might have a different way and you can do it the way that you know, but you're going to want to open up this number 31 guided notes. Let's fill in the blank. And if you take that tab and you pull it down, and then you pull it to like the far left of your screen, it will see how that kind of lit up. That if I just dropped it while I see that pop up, it will just make it into half the screen for me, at least if you're not in full screen mode. There we go. So it'll do that for you. And then you can pick whichever, you'll pick our Google Meet as like the other side of your screen. Then you can kind of make adjustments to where you're able to, because you guys are going to be typing in the missing information into where you see these blue asterisks. But I want you to be able to see what I'm presenting, and I want you to be able to have these guided notes. So you're kind of split. Does everybody see how to do that? Okay, does anybody need help doing that? So you should have on one side of our Meet, and then your guided notes over here. Okay, and so what you guys will do, I'll open this so you guys can see a little bit bigger. But I'm going to be going through this presentation as if we were discussing it in class. I'm going to be casting up the completed slides, but you guys are going to be filling in blanks. So wherever you see these asterisks, both of them are usually blue. For some reason, this one isn't. That is where missing information is. So you'll put your cursor in between and you fill in whatever the missing information is. Okay, and usually it will type in that light blue, but because my asterisk was messed up, it picked up. I'm going to fix it because that's going to bother me. So now when you go into between, it'll just type blue. All right. You will use this for an assignment that you'll be finishing at the end of class. So you need to make sure you're following along with us. If you happen to miss one, don't worry. At the end, I'll ask you what slides you need me to go back to, but try to keep up. I usually give you enough time. Don't worry about spelling necessarily, as long as it's pretty close. Most of the time, it's just a word or like 3 words or some type of phrase. But if you guys are ready to get going, I'll go ahead and start the presentation. I know. So you might have to zoom in a little bit. You have to do something, Elise? That's fine. I'm recording it and I'll post this. Yeah, if something is, like if you miss something, I will also be posting the video of the discussion we're having. All right, so we are going to, you guys watched a video that kind of introduced a little bit to the French and Indian War yesterday. So French and Indian War, the first thing I have to point out is if you just look at French and Indian War, you automatically assume it is a war between the French against the Indians. That is not true. This is going to be, first of all, it will be a war that's happening everywhere, but it is really a war where the French and the Indians, which are really the natives, are allies with each other, fighting against the British. All right, so it is not a war between the French and the Indians. It is a war where the French and Indians are fighting against the British and some Indians, but mostly the Indians don't like the British very much. Okay, so reason why we got to talk about the French and Indian War is, first of all, it is one of the underlying main causes to why we see us eventually get into the American Revolution. The things that transpired during this war are going to really start to divide the colonists and the crown, which is the British king and parliament. And it's going to really kind of start off this like list of grievances that the colonists will end up having towards the king and, Britain in general. So French and Indian War was actually just one portion of a much larger world war. It wasn't called the First World War, but it is one of the first world wars because you're actually seeing fighting happening on all the continents. So you got fighting in the Americas, you got fighting in Europe, which is pretty much constantly like that for most of history. And then you've also got some fighting going on in Asia. So anywhere where you see these lines, this is where you're going to see conflict kind of happening. You can see that the Spanish have a ton of land claimed throughout the world. The Portuguese, you got the British here, and then the pink that's within, that's France. You're right. Then you got the French, who are also kind of, making their name as well. So all these world players are really just fighting over a few things: money, power, and this idea of like economic balance where you are making more money than you're spending. But rather than talk about this whole war, which is what you'll talk about in world history next year, we're only going to focus on the portion of the war that was actually happening in America, like on the area that we live today. We call that the French and Indian War. So what is the French and Indian War specifically about? Mostly, it's about power. It's about economics, which means it's about money. And the portion of the war that's being fought in the Americas is really just between France and Britain, who basically hate each other. We've been in conflict with them, trying to kind of gain that world dominance. And not like we as in today, but like the British against the French for hundreds of years. And the reason why this kind of explodes here in the New World, in the British colonies and where France owned land over in North America, is an economic theory called mercantilism. And mercantilism, it's really, you're just trying to enrich the mother country. So the idea of mercantilism is you want to have this trade balance where you are importing, which means that you are buying goods less than you are selling goods, so that you are ultimately going to bring in more money than you are spending, right? That's what we all try to do. That's like the goal of probably your parents or even you. You want to make more money than you spend so that you constantly have wealth, that you constantly have money. And that's all mercantilism really is, except by utilizing colonies. Colonies are perfect for this idea of mercantilism, because what's perfect about colonies, especially the colonies in the Americas, is they are full of what you call raw materials. So they're full of things that you need to make products. So lumber, for instance. Lumber is a raw material. The colonies had tons of it. In Europe, are there a ton of trees growing everywhere? No, they just didn't have the land. So you have these American colonies that you, as the mother country, Britain, are able to import those, that lumber, turn it into furniture, and sell it for a really high cost. Now, usually when you import something, you're having to pay wherever you got it from a tax. Like if we buy something from China today, we usually pay a tax on it to be imported here. That then makes it more expensive. So that's what is great about colonies is colonies aren't charging you a tax because they're your colonies. So that's just like moving goods around your country, even though we obviously know that the colonies were very far away. So the British were able to, and the French, because they had colonies up there in like the Canadian area, they're able to buy goods for next to nothing and then sell them even to the colonies for a much higher price. So the more resources you have, the more money you can make in this time. And what do you need for resources? You need land. And there's tons of that in the New World. Way more land than we've really ever had access to. There's a whole continent that like we literally didn't know existed, a few hundred years before this. So in order to really take advantage of all those resources, you got to have as much land as possible. So before we see the French and Indian War break out, these are the land claims in North America at the time. So we've been hitting these ones hard. These are those 13 colonies. They are the British American colonies. Then you see in green, this is Spanish territory. And then here in the yellow, this is where France kind of has claims to. But you notice you've got this line here, these lines here. This is land that, because we've been having these small scale kind of battles, different wars between natives and French and British, for the past few hundred years, it's kind of disputed. There's never been any real true treaties that say who this land actually belongs to. The British think it's theirs. The French think it's theirs. And now that we're starting to really settle into these areas, this is really sought after land. You guys heard in that multiple perspectives how the plantation owner, I think his name is Samuel, wanted, to move west and be able to have more land for plantations. What land do you need to do that? It's right there. All right. But also with France, they want this because there's a lot of money to be made in the deer and fur skin trade. So they really want this area, and it's going to be referred to as the Ohio River Valley. See, we are so much more important in American history than you guys ever thought. Mostly that they fight for is in, Pennsylvania area. But either way, they refer to it as the Ohio River Valley. They want access to this land because what do rivers allow you to do? They allow you to transport goods really, really easily. So they're trying to get their hands in it, both of them. But because nobody actually owns the land and both sides kind of think that they should be able to move into it, that is where we see conflict. So here's what the French are thinking. They decide they want to take action. They want to really make their name and claim their stake in the Ohio River Valley. Like I said, they're trying to make money off that deer and fur skin trade. They've been spending the past few years really building strong relationships with natives because the natives are one that can really help them make the money off of that deer and fur skin trade. So they have this idea, we'd be nice to the natives, we get them to be our allies, we can therefore make more money. And since the natives and the British kind of have this sour relationship, like Ticat was kind of talking about in that multiple perspectives, the French are going to use that. They're going to use that to their advantage. They're going to use the fact that the British are kind of impeding and kind of taking over this land that the natives feel is theirs. And they're going to use that to their advantage so that the Indians want to side with them and help protect them. So the French start building forts and even taking over forts that were already built by the British in this Ohio River Valley. So their strategy, let's be nice to the natives. Let's move in here. We don't really want to colonize here. We just want to make money off of the land. And that's why the natives were kind of cool with it, because they're not trying to take our land. They're just trying to work in our land and hunt and fish, and that's fine. We can deal with that as long as you're not trying to take it. But the British had a little different vision. The governor at the time, the governor in Virginia, he ends up granting this land in the Ohio River Valley, which isn't even his, to a group of investors called the Ohio Company. It's basically a big real estate firm. They're trying to get people moving into this territory, selling the land off so that they can make money, right? Everything's about making money. So they start kind of divvying up this land, selling off this land, and British colonists are starting to move into this territory. But this makes the natives mad, right? Just like Takat said, you know, they're taking our land, they're continuing to kind of move into this territory, and soon enough, you know, there's going to be nothing. So it's not like the French who were just using it. These British want to do what they've been doing for the past 100 years and taking our land and pushing us off of it. So it's making the French angry because the French think they should have claim to this land. The British are angry because they think they should have stakes in this land, and the French are just building all these forts. But the British hadn't placed much importance on building relationships with natives. That is going to be their downfall here very early in the war. So what do the British do? Why I asked you about George Washington today. So this war is where Washington makes his big debut. We know that he ends up being our president. Some of us know that he was the head of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War, greatest general of all time, reason why we are America. Now, while most of that is true, he was a general during the during the Revolutionary War. He does end up becoming our first president. He also had served in the British Army. When he was 22 years old, he had been promoted to a lieutenant colonel in the Virginia militia. So each colony has their own, I will later. So each colony has their own militia that they have for protection. But ultimately, the British are in charge of each of the colonial militias. So he's a Virginia militia lieutenant colonel, but he is really kind of employed by the British Army. So anyways, they send this young 22-year-old with barely any war experience into the Ohio River Valley territory and tell him, you got to stop all this fort building. You got to talk to the French and get them to kind of move out. This is our territory. So Washington's main goal was to take over Fort Duquesne, which is in modern day Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So you might have actually been there before if you go to Pittsburgh a lot. Problem is he's making his way there. He's realizing how strong and fortified Fort Duquesne actually is. He makes the mistakes of kind of running into this regiment of French soldiers. They end up, we're not really sure who shot the first shot in this skirmish, but either way, they end up into a little battle. And Washington, they end up killing like 9 French soldiers, a few natives, and taking the rest of the people captive. But realizing they didn't really have enough people to continue and attack Fort Duquesne, he starts to retreat back, and he ends up building a few miles away Fort Necessity, like around the southern border of Pennsylvania. So they quickly build this fort, but anything that's done quickly usually isn't done well. And this fort is no exception. Didn't hold up. The French retaliate when they hear of Washington's, actions, and they capture the fort. Washington ends up being forced to surrender. Now, this seems like it shouldn't be all that big of a deal. I mean, it was only 9 men and just a little bit, of conflict. But the problem was is neither of these countries were technically had declared war on each other yet. So by Washington going in there seemingly hostile, at least the French can justify it that way, this is going to really push the French to get into this war over the land with Britain. Some say that Washington's missteps here might have caused the in the first place, although it was probably inevitable. And Washington does get better. So this wasn't a great move for him, but it does get better. Either way, he's got to surrender the fort. He's got to go back to Virginia, kind of tail between your legs. And we're going to see war be declared between the French and the British in the New Americas. And at first, the French absolutely continue to dominate. Caleb, did you have a question? Okay, so, whoop.
No, I didn't know the space bar could unmute.
Oh, you're good. All right, so the French pretty much dominate in these first 3 years. Not really looking too great for the British, but they've got a lot to lose here. They really do not want to lose this access to the Ohio River. So until the British end up coming up with a new strategy under the kind of guidance of William Pitt, who's the current Prime Minister of Britain, they end up adapting a whole new strategy that matched the native way of fighting. So since the natives were aligned with the French, what was really causing all the issues was the ambushes that they were getting by these native allies of the French. And the British just were kind of drowning in it. Like they weren't able to handle it. So William Pitt kind of decides, like, let's just switch our strategy then. Now, this is after some soldiers are already starting to adapt to this new type of warfare that we call guerrilla warfare. And it's not traditional at all. It's not something that we saw utilized in England and Asia and Africa at the time. It's this hide behind bushes and creeks and use the land to your advantage in order to, overtake your enemy. Use weapons that are quicker, like bow and arrows, rather than guns. So they've got this idea that if we kind of fight the way that they fight, we're going to even the playing field rather than just standing there and basically letting ourselves get shot from all angles. We're going to see guerrilla warfare, what it looks like in The Patriot when we watch it at the end of the quarter. We'll definitely point it out for you. So the British finally start to change course. Once they, train themselves in this new way of battle, they're starting to make some gains. The natives, now that the British are doing a little bit better, the French aren't really able to protect them. They can't really protect themselves. They actually start abandoning the French. And without the natives, the French it's a little more even playing field, and they're just not doing as well. They don't have the same resources that the British have. So after a 9-year conflict, it's starting to slow down in 1758 and 1759. The French realize they're outnumbered, outgunned, and they end up retreating and basically surrendering to the British. So the war is going to officially end with the Treaty of Paris. This is where we're going to see a ton of land be awarded to the British. So this was that map I showed you at the beginning of how the territories were laid out. This is what it looks like after the treaty. Now, there were other land claims that were kind of shifted in the rest of the world as a part of this treaty. This treaty ended that whole 7 Years' War, not just the French and Indian. But like I said, we're focused on what was happening over here. So after the war, you see the French had to give up most of that territory to the British and the rest over to Spain. But Spain really isn't doing anything with this area. we're actually going to end up getting it for a really good deal here in a few years. But now we've done it, right? This was the goal, more land. We achieved it. At least the British thought they did. Now the problem is who's not on this map at all? The natives. The natives aren't too happy about that. The natives are sitting here like, okay, the French weren't that bad. They were really just kind of working with us, giving us guns and ammo and trading with us, and they weren't really trying to take our land. But here we know through this long history of Britain doing this to us that they're just trying to take our land. So after the French move out, the British are still left fighting the natives. And it starts off small scale as the colonists start to move into that Ohio River Valley and into this land that they now feel is theirs because they just fought for it. They're getting attacked by natives. Some small scale, some big scale. Then there's this chief, Chief Pontiac, who is the head of the Ottawa tribe. He starts talking to different tribes around the region saying, why don't we get together and like fight against these guys and hold our territory and not let them move into our territory? So they're able to do really well. They take some forts, some major forts in Detroit. They take some major forts in like the Ohio, Indiana Valley or areas. But ultimately, because they don't have the backing of the French anymore, they don't have the resources that they once had. So they will end up signing a peace treaty. Doesn't last for too long, but they do sign a peace treaty, and that kind of ends Pontiac's war. But it brings up the bigger picture that the natives are not just going to like lay down and let this happen. And that is going to cause an issue for the king. Because the king has spent all this money defeating the French, winning this war, and not just here in America, but he's done it everywhere. And Britain's kind of hurting right now. War costs a lot of money. And he doesn't have the resources to help protect the colonists if they move into these new territories. So he knows if we want to avoid continuing this constant battle with natives, we are going to have to slow our roll and not move into that territory so quickly. He also knew that if the colonists continued to kind of spread into this land, that large of an area is going to be really hard to govern, one, and protect. That's going to take a lot of resources. So the solution that the king comes up with is the Proclamation Line of 1763. And that's basically, he draws this line that kind of follows the Appalachian Mountains and says none of the king's subjects should be able to settle into this new land that all the Americans just thought that they fought to win. So basically like, yeah, I know you guys all gave your life and everything to, you know, help beat the French so that we could have this land. But yeah, you can't go over there. We're going to reserve that for the Native Americans. So diplomatic. That sounds so great that he would say he's going to preserve it for the natives. But let's face it, he just didn't want to pay for it. He didn't want to. What's that?
Also in the video, they ignore the orders and just go there anyway.
Yep, that's what we're getting to too. Because I mean, he's all the way across that. That'd be like your parents trying to tell you that you can't do something when they like were on the moon. You know, you're gonna do what you want to do because it's not like they can see it, right? So we do end up seeing the colonists just blatantly ignore this. But the king still does send the king does still send his soldiers to start fortifying this area a little bit to kind of try to police it, to protect the colonists. But the colonists don't see it that way. They see it as like, whoa, dude, like, get out of the way. We're just gonna do what we had fought for. My brother lost his life for this, so we're gonna go ahead and take this land. And this is really ultimately the problem with all wars, is everybody's view on it. So the view in the colonies is very different than the British view. The British, I truly believe, at least in the British minds, that they felt like they were doing the right thing. Let's leave this land up for the natives. Maybe we can do what the French were doing and we'll build relationships with them and we'll just start making money off of it. But the colonists don't see the benefit in that. They see benefit in owning land and getting that land. So when they fought the war, they weren't looking at it as a way to make money for Britain. They were looking at it as a way to make it better for them. So the colonists' view on the French and Indian War and the King's Proclamation is going to be vastly different than the British view. Because overall, the colonists are kind of feeling good. Like, they're like, hey, we just beat the French. We just won this territory. We fought hard for it. We got a lot of experience out of it because we really haven't been in this, type of war yet, type of large-scale war yet. And they're eager to take the land that they just won. So then when the king comes down with this proclamation and says, yeah, I know you just fought for it, but you're not allowed to go, they're mad. And they're just like, well, whatever. We're just going to do it anyways. So that kind of tells you how much they really respect the decisions of the king anyways, which is really Britain's fault because they've been kind of ignoring the colonies and letting them do what they want for the past 100 years. But now all of a sudden that the king actually has to put in money into the colonies, now he cares about actually controlling things a little bit and enforcing things a little bit. So in the British view, they're looking at like the colonists could have never done this without us. They were slow to organize. We tried to get them to help us monetarily and they didn't want to give us any money. Protecting them would be so expensive as they move west. How selfish of them to want to move into that territory and expect us to pay for it. You're really starting to get a negative view of the colonists if you're living in Britain right now. And it's putting a sour taste in their mouth as well. So the king feels like he's doing this in the best interest of his colonies, and the colonies just think like, no, you're just trying to control me. So nobody really thinks they're the bad guy here. They just kind of blame it on the other side, which is really where we see a lot of wars for here on out. But this is what scared the king. The colonies are starting to talk about, hey, if we kind of get together, we're gonna be a lot stronger. So how about we send some people from each of the colonies. We'll make a legislative body, like an assembly, like we've been doing in each colony, where we'll make laws that are better for all 13 colonies, because when we do stuff together, we're a lot stronger. We'll let the king kind of give us the leader that will have the ultimate say yes or no, but let's come together. This was proposed by Ben Franklin. It's called the Albany Plan. And all the plan was is say, hey, let's unite together so we can kind of, stand up to the natives if we have to. We'll be more successful if we come together. But this wasn't a proposal to declare independence because in the Albany Plan, the king was going to get to set who the executive power was. So who we would kind of think of later on as the president. The king would get to appoint that person. I could just say that would get to appoint him because it would definitely be a man. Now the king is looking at this like, yeah, that's not happening. If you guys start to come together and start making laws that benefit all of you guys, yeah, my guy might get the final say at first, but eventually this is going to go all wrong. But you can kind of see the writing on the wall here, right? The idea here is do we really need Britain anymore? Do we really need them to be telling us what to do? Or could we kind of just unite together? Yeah, I want to get, because there's only 3 more minutes left, so I want to get through the last one. And I'm going to post this so you can go on through the video and find your slide you need. All right, and then a big impact is going to be George Washington. So why does George Washington decide one day, I'm going to lead the Continental Army and lead America for their independence? It was because he served in the British Army and he was pissed at them. I mean, he is angry because as he was this general, because he got better, he made some mistakes at the beginning, but he thought that decisions were made slow. He didn't believe that the British trained their soldiers very well. But the biggest grievance he had in general was the fact that a colonial officer in his status, because he was born in America, was paid half for someone of the same rank that was born in Britain. So just because he was born in America, he was paid almost half for doing the same exact job. And then so when he goes to the king, not specifically to the king, but asks and applies for royal commission, so to get paid like his other British officers, he gets denied. He doesn't get any more money. So he's starting to say, like, well, what's like, we're all the king's men. Like, why I'm fighting for the king. Why am I getting paid less than someone doing the same exact thing as me? And this is really going to start his distaste for the British. All right. So ultimately, you got the king mad at the colonists mad at the king's proclamation. Felt like it was a complete waste of money to send these British troops over here to just basically stop them from going. Britain, on the other hand, thinks that, well, the Americans are ones that are the beneficiaries of the war, so they should have to pay for it. So the king comes up with this idea of taxing the colonists to make them pay for this war. That is going to end up being the nail in the coffin, ultimately. We're going to look at some of those taxes that he enacts to help pay for this war that are really going to drive the colonists to even more dissatisfaction with the king. All right, and that's going to lead us to the American Revolution. All right, so I know you definitely didn't get those last slides. I am going to post this, and that's what you'll have time at the beginning of the period tomorrow to finish any of the notes that you didn't get. But the bell is ringing now, so just finish what you can. You can log out, and I will post this for you guys. All right.
Miss